out a year for the United States. And as always, research never goes as planned, so my control variables for my linear regression and graphical analysis for this study was the type of political system, as I mentioned before, proportional representation or single member district. Once I looked at all the data, pretty much had to eliminate those for my study because it was insignificant on the effect of the study. While the level of corruption was another control variable, which in fact proved to be relevant to my study, and the level of development, which I measured by GDP per capita, both of which were conducted in 2008 for those data representations. So once I had all these independent variable, dependent variables, and control variable numbers that I spent months gathering, I got really friendly with SPSS, spent hours working in that, and performed the graphical analysis for each of the independent variables to the dependent, and then the control variables to the dependent variable, along with a linear regression for each of those. When you can perform a linear regression, normally you want an R-squared value. It's just kind of one of those values that our people across different communities can recognize, and you want it to be 0.800 or higher. Well, once I did all this linear regression stuff, my independent variables did not even come close to 0.800. Most of them were 0.300 or below, which is horrendous in the eyes of scholars. Even though they flopped, one relationship did held up: the importance of democracy. This may not show that there is a strong relationship between each of the independent variables. However, if I were to continue this study, it'd be interesting to understand the dynamics between each of the independent variables themselves, and then do a multiple linear regression where I layer them on top of each other to better understand the relationships between each of those variables that I mentioned before, to really get at the heart of why voter turnout is on the decline. The importance of democracy, R-squared value, was a 0.799, so right below that threshold that most people are looking for. And the control variables, as I mentioned previously, proved relevant to my study. The level of corruption, R-squared value, was 0.774. So again, right below that threshold, and then the level of development was a little lower with a 0.567 R-squared value. Now, although those aren't quite what you want to understand a correlational relationship, they do prove that there is some kind of relationship going on between all of those variables. Again, I can't get at the heart of the problem, but there is something going on with my variables. Under all the given information from all the math and the diving in SPSS and staring at graphs all day, I would end up rejecting the hypothesis that when there is a high level of voter interest in politics, there will be a high level of voter turnout. However, I think that with more time, of a coverage of time of data from instead of 2005 to 2009, I expand that out, whether that's further back or further into the future, it would definitely change how that turns out. I also think that with more data points, more countries, and maybe more variables themselves for independent variables, it might change the outlook on some of these as well. Might even take a look at Turkey and a few other countries in the area around there as well. So in the future, as I mentioned, I might want to do some multiple linear regression, include more countries, and examine the relationships between the variables themselves, because there is something going on between all of those. And despite all of this, even though there may not be a relationship, no relationship does not mean there's a bad relationship. Thank you.
Real data, real statistics, what a concept. We can take it to Madison, I'm sure. And our final talk tonight is by a gang of folks, actually, and I'm not sure how many of them are here, but I'm going to name them off. It's just you? Okay, well, I'm going to name them anyway. Lillian, Malik, Hallie Rosenberg, Emily Lindbergh, Rebecca Pletka, and Jenna Vanderbilt. And the faculty mentor is Rachel Albert. And the talk is in the poster, The title is Mothers versus Others. Caregiving Experience Influences Perception of Infant Vocalizations. Emma?
Alright, so before I can begin, I'd like to thank ERSCA for funding our trip to SRCD. Basically, what our lab decided was to look at, we were interested in looking at how infants learn language through interactions with their caregivers. We know that these interactions impact infant development with their, it impacts their vocal development, their vocabulary size, and their word learning. So as a lab, we looked at caregiving experience, how it influences perception and responses to these vocalizations. To do this, we used a playback paradigm, which is basically audio-video clips of an infant at play, and then they vocalize. And we had the participants respond to these videos as if the infant were actually in the room. And then after the video clips were done, they hear the vocalization again, and then they would rate it on a scale of 1 to 7, based on how speech-like they heard it, 1 being least speech-like, 7 being most speech-like. So we used 4 different types of vocalizations. The first being quasi-resonant. This is your least speech-like, kind of nasally, a grunt. Here's an example for you. And this one is made from infants since birth. The second being fully resonant, a little bit more speech-like than the quasi-resonant. And this starts at about 4 to 5 months. And then there's the marginal syllable, again, more speech-like than the fully resonant. Zetting the consonant, and it begins at about 6 months. And then the most speech-like, the canonical syllable. This is kind of what you think of when you hear infants babble, the ba, the da, that sort of thing. And this begins at about 9 months. So, in our first experiment, we decided to look at mothers versus non-mothers. We took 40 mothers versus 40 non-mothers. And as you can see, this is actually them in front of the paradigm. You can see them, the infant playing and how they're responding. They're smiling, they're happy. I mean, who doesn't love infants after all? And then here is a graph of how they perceived these sounds. Again, how speech they viewed it and the different types of speech. And then the blue being non-mothers, green being mothers. You can see there's significant differences in how they perceived these vocalizations. The mothers perceived most groups of speech types as more speech-like as compared to the non-mothers. As you can also see, they were able to tell which vocalization was actually more speech-like by the staircase pattern that's across the categories. So then from there, we decided to look at how experience with infants, if it actually has an effect and is the reason for this difference in perception. So we took non-mothers, inexperienced non-mothers, so your typical college girl, and then experienced non-mothers, which are daycare workers. And we had them do the same procedure, playback paradigm, and then rate the vocalizations. And as you can see, there really is no significant difference in how they perceived these vocalizations. So, to look closer, we decided to look at the response types, this being how often they use the response. And then we categorized it in 5 different categories. There's your questioning, description, describing what the baby's doing, affirmations, good job, that sort of thing. Play prompts, so roll me the ball, and then imitation, basically just imitating what the infant is doing. As you can see, the inexperienced group used a lot of questions, whereas the experienced group just used a wider variety of responses in comparison. So, basically, to summarize, we found that there is a difference in how mothers perceive and respond to these vocalizations, and caregiving experience doesn't seem to affect how they perceive these sounds, but it does affect how they respond to these sounds. So in future directions, we are going to take a look at further into the caregiving experience and how that affects their response types. And We also decided it was important to understand this because actually most formal childcare in the U.S. is given by non-parents, which is kind of surprising considering you want parents to watch after your kids. But all right, so the results are basically helpful in helping us understand a bit more about the factors that help impact how and when these caregivers respond to the infants, as well as the factors that promote the actual language development of these infants. So thank you all for coming out.
Just to close up, what we'll do after this is we'll break up and you can visit the students at their posters, talk to the faculty, etc. And I just want to say that this is the first time we've done this, taking a sampling of our symposium and our students and our faculty. I'm always blown away. Every time I hear our students talk, and every time I hear them speak so intelligently, working towards their professional careers, it is amazing, and I'm very proud to be the Dean of the College of Letters and Science. This is why. You guys are the reason that we're here. And the relationship that you develop with your faculty mentors is the most important relationship that you will probably have in your professional life. It will make all the difference in your lives. Make sure you keep it throughout your professional career. So once again, I want to thank everyone for participating. We'll break up now and look at individual posters. Thank you for coming.